Welcome to the first episode of the Telegraph Cricket Podcast.
Who's going to be the next great partnership with the ball for England?
Have you tried to educate players on what to say, or is that impossible?
They don't train, they're lazy, arrogant, all of that stuff.
I always worry whenever anyone says to me, do you know what, Stokes is looking magnificent, and because that's when he always gets injured.
Yeah, I think he'd be an excellent head coach of England. Andrew Flintoff, there you go, there's your soundbite that you can have.
He came out with some words about Bazball and said they would never work in Australia and it's great fun to watch, but actually England never win any games of cricket.
So we want to create a time where we're actually up there competing on all fronts, in all conditions.
Hi, Stuart Broad here. I hope you're enjoying a great summer. I'm here with Laithwaite's Wine, the proud sponsor of the Telegraph's Cricket Podcast. Check out my Beyond the Wicket range of wines at Laithwaite's, inspired by my memories travelling the world playing this incredible sport we love. Visit laithwaites.co.uk for more details.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Telegraph Cricket Podcast. I'm your host, Jay Goodwill, and with me is our chief cricket correspondent, Nick Hoult, and our cricket news correspondent, Will Macpherson. We'll be coming to you throughout this test summer against India. But first and foremost, gents, thoughts on the series ahead?
Well, I mean, what a series we've got coming up. India, we know they're going through a period of regeneration, but that in itself is really exciting to see who's coming through next. And England, it feels a long time since I've seen England play Test cricket. I know they played Zimbabwe a couple of weeks ago, but that wasn't really a Test match. It seems a long time since they played in New Zealand, and we're at the start of 10 Test matches that are going to define a lot of things and a lot of people's futures, and culminating in Australia. So I think it's going to be a terrific next 6 weeks, and I think England are going to win actually, and I think they're going to set themselves up nicely for the Ashes.
Yeah, throughout this century, really, this series in England-India has sort of got bigger and bigger and bigger. Each one is bigger than the last, to the point where you have genuine, there's legitimate conversations about whether England versus India is as big as the Ashes, or is the same when India and Australia over winter. Is the Border Gavaskar as big as the Ashes? I don't think either of them are, but it's it's really quite close. So I'm really excited for it. I agree with Nick that England should win against this India team, but the beauty of India is that Kohli and Rohit are gone, but you don't actually know whether that makes them weaker or stronger. The depth of talent is so unbelievable. We see it in the IPL, and what's so good about Indian cricket as well is so many of these guys who light up the IPL are actually brilliant red ball players as well. They don't work in silos in quite the same way that other countries do. These guys will be red ball superstars at some stage as well. So I'm really excited to see what some of those new guys can do with a bat. And yeah, I mean, it's England team. It is judgment time, isn't it? They've been in the job for 3 years, but this is the year we've all kind of been building up to, these 10 Test matches, and they will come quickly. They come fast in 2 kind of 7-week chunks, don't they? June, July, and then November to early January. Just can't wait.
Do you think there's any chance that India are underestimated at all by England because they haven't got Rohit, they haven't got Virat, there's no Ashwin? It's a very different looking side to the one we're used to. Any chance of that creeping in, do you think, Nick?
I think under previous regimes I would have said yes, because I think that you could often see England get a little bit surprised by new players. I think this setup less so, not because they're more diligent on their preparation and all that kind of thing, but I think because Stokes is such an instinctive captain, and I think he reads a game, and I think McCullum does as well, and they read the game very quickly, and they read players very quickly too, and that's their own players and the opposition. So no, I don't think they'll underestimate them. I mean, again, the series will be decided on by whether they can cope with Jasprit Bumrah at the top of the batting and at the top of the order, and that is the thing that will decide whether England score enough runs for their bowling attack to be able to defend. And we don't know how many Test matches they'll get out of Bumrah. Maybe it's only 3, but that might be enough for India.
Yeah. And what I'd say about that is as well that the cricketing world got a lot smaller, and although English fans, as I say, might kind of jump to a conclusion that there's no Virat Kohli, there's no Rohit Sharma, that India are automatically weaker. As I said before, that's not necessarily true, and maybe we're guilty of underestimating India by saying we expect England to win that last series.
Yes, you have both already predicted that England will win in quite comprehensive fashion.
In 2021.
It's very hard to win in England.
Yeah.
That is, it's very hard to win in India. It's very hard to win in England. And so that's what you're building it on mainly, is to win in England. For
The Bazballers haven't lost at home, have they? No. They drew the Ashes, but they haven't lost at home. And in 2021, India were 2-1 up when that series ended. England then beat them in 2022.
That was the peak of that Indian team then, wasn't it? They would have beaten this England team, I think. But
I think the Indian players who are coming in and maybe playing red ball cricket in England for the first time or whatever, but might be new to English fans or even to us, but to this team, the cricketing world's got that much smaller with the IPL, and McCullum's kind of got that IPL background. Stokes has played a bit out there. They'll know who these guys. I don't think there's any danger of underestimating them, to be honest. Whether they get high on their own supply at some stage and a bit giddy, and a bit like they did do that in Australia. They certainly weren't underestimating against Australia 2 years ago. They certainly weren't underestimating them. But it's just whether the fumes of their own Bazball project get too much for them. I would hope they've learned a lot from that Ashes series, especially those first 2 tests. But this is their kind of biggest home test since then, and we'll see.
Absolutely. And if from an England perspective, obviously the Ashes is looming on the horizon, as it always seems to be, but it is pretty close now. What do you think is the one thing from an England perspective they'll want to get out of this summer? If there's one thing that comes off for them and goes well, one element of the team, what do you think they'd be most hoping for?
I think they'll be hoping to bed down their top 7. There is obviously still a question mark over particularly the number 3 position, but various other parts of the top 7 as well are not totally certain. Bed down top 7, so they turn up in Australia with knowing who those 7 are, but also they have got an 8th player, be it Pope or Bethel, hanging around and good to go. I think if they do that, they will turn up to Australia with the stronger batting order. We watched Australia in the World Test Championship final this weekend there at Lords, and the top 3 don't look too hot. They've got a few problems up there. They're going to the Caribbean now, and they might go some way to sorting that stuff out, but they look a bit muddled, Australia, whereas England, there's a lot of clarity in that batting order, and just getting those final pieces of the jigsaw nailed down. I think they can turn up in Australia with a stronger batting order, which when did we last say that?
Getting a test match out of Jofra Archer will
be huge excitement.
It'll be huge excitement. Has he still got the same snap? He's still got the same pace? He said yes, he can in forward when he's bowling 4 overs in T20 cricket, but what about in a red ball test match on a flat pitch? That would be something that they will be desperate to see come off, because they don't have the depth of bowling to take on Australia really without him and Wood fit. We've seen South Africa with Rabada and India with Bumrah, that they've got those tools, but England haven't at the moment, so they need those 2 fit. That's one thing. And like Will says, the top 7 definitely. Seeing Crawley score some runs to just quiet down that debate around him, which is much bigger outside the team than it is in it, to be fair. But he is averaging 30 in Test cricket, and they will need more consistency from him, because you only really also win in Australia if you score a lot of runs.
And I think the other thing which I'm particularly interested in looking how it unfolds really is Shoaib Bashir. I think he's obviously played very well for England, but India are obviously fantastic players of spin. I've no doubt they'll go after him. If he comes through this summer well, it's going to be massive going into the Ashes. If he really struggles, that's going to be a real headache. And obviously his whole development has been towards having a taller bowler who can thrive in Australian conditions. So it'll be a bit of a spanner in the works if he struggles this series, I think.
Yeah, and it would, but they've put so much faith into him, and I don't think I think he will have moments where he gets hit out the attack and does struggle against India because they're such brilliant players of spin. But I think he's shown an ability to bounce back from that's remarkable for a player of his age, and that goes down to 2 things. One, the Stokes leadership, which isn't just Stokes, giving him the right field or, bringing him on at the right time. It is about the confidence he gives him to accept that, okay, you get hit for 4s and 6s. And I think spin bowlers expect that now, whereas previous generations didn't because of what happens in T20. But that also spreads to the rest of the team. You never see any other England player, when Bashir bowls a full toss, rolling their eyes, which I have seen on the field with other spin bowlers, because they're all behind Stokes. Stokes would be back this bloke 100%. And it doesn't seem, he seems to wash over Shoaib, which must be the sort of innocence of youth, you know.
Bashir versus Pant is absolute box office, isn't it?
Yeah.
Left-hander in the middle order who just tries to get after spin.
Big sixes, comedy dismissals, feels like there's a range of outcomes.
Heading into this week as well, that short boundary straight, that's going to be immediate sort of thing to look at.
Pant obviously wasn't available when England were in India last year, and so I've just found that really exciting that he's back here. He's just so for all that some superstars have moved on, they still have a fair few on that side.
Do you think Dawson is a shout? I mean, you covered the T20s, I didn't.
Yeah,
he
bowled well, didn't he, when he came back? And I do think that was a sort of soft launch of Liam Dawson coming back into the England fold. He hadn't been in a squad under McCullum yet. That was the first look for him. There was a sense that Dawson doesn't want to be involved if he's not going to know he's playing. They obviously gave him that assurance in the T20. He wasn't in the ODI squad, but you could see how that might develop later this summer, that he could come into the picture there. It's kind of it looks on the surface like a specific gig till the end of the T20 World Cup next year, which is in India and Sri Lanka. So you need a good left-arm spinner there. But he's now around McCullum and that management setup, and they'll have had a reminder of how good he can be and how ready he is just to be plugged in at any point. So I don't think it's, if things were to go awry with Bashir, and I don't think that's actually going to happen, but if they were to, then I think Dawson is there and ready to go. I think that might have been part of the motivation for getting him to have a look.
Well, we have a treat for our very first episode with the Managing Director of English Men's Cricket, Rob Key, joining us next. Well, Rob Key, thank you for coming into the Telegraph Cricket Podcast. What's your assessment of the English summer so far?
Well, I feel like it's about to begin, really. No disrespect to Zimbabwe and the white ball stuff, certainly from a test series as it goes. This is now, it's been relatively quiet, not much going on. I thought the start to the white ball stuff under Harry Brook was excellent, the way they went about it. So that was really exciting. But I think it all begins on Friday, doesn't it, really? It's been a nice, slow build-up to what's going to be an outstanding series.
Absolutely. And did you have a close eye on the World Test Championship final last week?
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Actually, I thought there's two great bowling attacks. You look at that at Lords on a pitch, that offers something for everyone. But, what really was the standout was when you look at South Africa's attack. I know Markram played brilliantly, but what they've had for a long time now, and they're just getting better with the likes of Janssen coming of age, so to speak. He's now right in his pomp. That's a brilliant attack. And obviously Australia always makes it, what I always find slightly frustrating is how they manage to keep those bowlers fit for almost everything. Like that's the dream, isn't it? If you can keep Cummins, Stark, Hazelwood, the era that they've had has been a lot because of those guys. And, obviously Nathan Lyon you put with that. So that's the holy grail, really, being able to keep your best bowlers fit like that for as long as possible.
Why, without wanting to go into fitted early doors, why is it that we spend our whole time talking about which English bowlers are fit and who's injured, and since 2017 those three guys have managed to play so much cricket? Why is it that they have that and we have what we have?
Well, it's not strictly true that we haven't, because if you think, we've probably got the two bowlers that have played more cricket than anyone else in terms of Test cricket in James Anderson and Stuart Broad. So we've done that as well. It's just those guys dropped out of white ball cricket quite some time ago. So we've only really seen them in Test cricket. And what happens, we've sort of looked into all of this, what happens, there becomes a point, and this is where young bowlers, you got to push them, then pull them back. All this stuff only bowl this amount of overs, do that. They need to develop their robustness. Their bones need to strengthen. Their body needs to harden, which is what's happening. Now, Cummins had lots of stress fractures and injuries and was out for a long, long time. But there comes a point, they reckon, sort of 23 and beyond, where bowlers, they properly developed and matured. Not until that point. That's what annoys me a little bit about the system, where, we've, because of lots of different reasons, we seem to make a lot of decisions on players at 18 in county cricket. And it's not till 23 do they actually really come of age and develop that robustness where they can play more. You look, all the bowlers that get injured the least are the older guys. It's not the younger guys. The younger guys get injured. They go through that period and then they have a period where in a good spot for a while. And hopefully the likes of Tongue, Jofra, who's on the road back, Bryden Cass, Matt Potts, all of them will now be at a point where they're at that stage, but that's fingers crossed.
So is everything kind of been built towards having those guys fit for Australia in their preparation, and this summer's been a little bit of a kind of anomaly, or is it, is that all the grand plan to have a kind of full kind of...
I just think it's fit for everything. We're now going to be in a time where you look at Bryden Cass led the attack in the white ball series, and hopefully the schedule works now for a bit where we can do that. What we're going to have to be smart with in this series and the Ashes, the same thing, is that we actually do a bit more plug and play. So we get to the point. I hate rest and rotation because it's like a premeditated, you're not going to play the third test, you're not going to... I don't like that, but we have to be flexible throughout. So we have to get to the point, probably before, where you go, do you know what, I reckon we can refresh here in this spot. And that's where we've got a batch of bowlers. And the brilliant thing, same with India a little bit, with the young players that are coming through to them since Rohit Sharma and Virat Kohli have retired from Test cricket, is like, who's going to be the next great partnership with the ball for England? Who's going to be the next Broad and Anderson? It could be a number of players. And it's not about Australia. It's about, this is the attack that we want to build for the next 10 years, really, in a lot of cases.
Is Jofra Archer tracking still for the second test in India? I mean, and are you confident that when he does come back, he's still going to have that same pace with the red ball?
Well, yeah, I think so. We watched him in the IPL and he was bowling. He's just a natural talent. Like Luke Wright, when he did the media the other day, I kept hammering him because he kept saying trucking. Everyone was trucking really well, and so-and-so's trucking really well. I said, mate, how many times are you going to say trucking? Where did that come from? But no, he is tracking well. So we're hoping that he's going to be ready for the second test. But like all these things, when he gets there, that's like, I'll breathe out a little bit.
Yeah.
What does he need to do to play that second test? Is he still planning to play for Sussex on Sunday?
Yeah, so he's down to play the championship, which starts the 22nd. And then, we feel like he's enough of a talent that it's more about, again, him getting through a red ball game. It's about him being out, and we're going to have to be smart with him, as Ben's going to have to be smart with himself, that he can't be bowling 12 over spells, that type of thing. And you use him as that strike bowler. But then, once he's in form, then it's a question of, we'll see what happens and what we do with that bowling attack. I think we're away from the time now where you sort of like think, your chips go all in with Jofra because him and Woody are the only pace options. Now we've got a few. These guys have done really well over the last, especially in places like Pakistan and that series they won in New Zealand. Those guys have done brilliantly. So it's not a case of just he comes in regardless, but we'll know at his best. He's one of the most exciting talents in the world, with the ball, and he's got everything, and that's the most exciting thing about him.
And what's Mark Wood's status fitness-wise?
Going well. He potentially could be ready for the back end of this series, but again, the same thing. We'll sort of, we'll cross those bridges when we come to it, really. And the good thing with Mark Wood is that, he's again got one of those rare abilities where he can sort of come in, find a line and length I don't think of another bowler who does this, without playing lots and lots of games, but he's like a racehorse. You've got to sort of treat him carefully, and he's got to be able to impact, in key moments at that top end, which he does. So I don't know, you may see him by the end of the series, but then I think certainly then when you fast forward to the Ashes, then he should be fine for that. But look, there's a lot that can happen between then. But again, he's trucking along well.
Has Luke spent a lot of time in New Zealand? Is that right?
Yeah, no, I don't know where it comes from.
So if I offered you Jofra Archer for 3 tests in the Ashes and Mark Wood for 3 tests in the Ashes, would you bite my hand off for that now, or?
I can't possibly think that far ahead. I'll just take what's in front of me now.
Good answer.
We asked you about a WTC final this week. It was a great event. I don't know if you've had any of the days, but England have had a kind of slightly weird relationship with it over the first couple of cycles, and I think Stokes is maybe not the biggest fan, but there's a new cycle beginning on Friday, and I actually think it begins today with a Sri Lanka-Bangladesh series, but on Friday for England. Is it a big target for this team to get to a WTC final? It obviously looks like it'll be in England again.
Yeah, I sort of feel like it's just a big target to try and win every single game we can, to be honest. And if you do that, then you'll end up in a good spot when the World Test Championship final comes around. I think Stokes' point, and it was probably fair, is that it's hard to understand. Like, it's not as simple as, right, 3 points for a win, 1 point for a draw, all of that type of stuff. But ultimately, we just try and win every single game we can. And there's lots of different things at play, as you know. Like so like we don't control the schedule. If you wanted to go out and create the best schedule possible to win the World Test Championship, you might not play 5 Test series. You might not play against the best teams at overseas, stuff like that. But there's more things at play, like the way that the way that the commercial side of things works in English cricket. So, we just try. We don't really focus. We try and win this series we got against India, then the same thing against Australia. Clearly, everyone is going to judge how we're doing on those 2 series as well. Then there'll be the World Test Championship. So, I sort of just try and win whatever's in front of you, really, or we do. Say, I'm not even playing. Like, thank God. But so no, we don't. We just love to be up there in everything. I think getting to number 1 is a big thing as well. Like I look at it, and English cricket has been sort of number 1 in the world, I think, for only 12 months of the year. 12 months since 1981. But in recent times, you go back to like 2014, we've not even been number 2 that much. We've not been number 3. We've pretty much been hovering between 4th and 5th. So we want to create a time where we're actually up there competing on all fronts, in all conditions. That's why you build a bowling attack for that, not just one series and then you fall off a cliff, so that's what we're trying to do.
Why, what's the internal theory about why England spent so little time at the top of the rankings? Why do you think it is?
I don't know. I feel like that's unfair because I'm going to then start slagging off previous people to do that. Like there's lots.
Feel free.
There's lots and lots of different reasons and stuff like that. But ultimately, we want to try. We want to try and move ahead with what we think is a team and an era that can compete everywhere and anywhere. And that's not what English cricket's done for a while, especially you think with the resources that we've had in English cricket. You think of, when I was playing county cricket, when I started in late 90s, like English cricket was the place where everyone came to play. That was like all the overseas players. I was so lucky we played with, you think I played with Steve Waugh, played with Muralitharan, played with Dravid, played against Shane Warne, all of these people. This county cricket was the place everyone came to play. And yet still England didn't thrive as much as they could have done. So we've had the most sort of structured resource system for a long time, since probably now with the exception of India. Yet, where we've been is where we've been. So we want to try and push on and, achieve, more than that.
Are you feeling that sort of sense that this is the 10 Test that everybody's looking to say will define an era? Do you feel that?
I feel that's what, there's no doubt that everyone will define this era on that, and then they'll define it on something else, but there's no question. I mean, I don't define myself and what I've done by how we go in the next, the next 10 Test matches, but I'm sure that everyone else do. And do you know what? Like, that's a great story. That's what you want with cricket, really. You want, I don't really like the Bazball term, but it drives a great story as well.
It's a great book about it, actually.
Well, so I've heard. Yeah, I've not read it. I started but couldn't get through it. But
chewy, isn't it?
It makes a good doorstop.
It's just like long in it. But I just, I think that they all create interest in the game. And I think there's nothing better than when you see, like the Ashes series we had here a couple of years ago, when I felt like cricket was the thing that everyone was talking about. And I think that's brilliant. So I don't really begrudge any of that stuff, but what we've done and what we'll look to do is not, for me personally, there's players that will go on past me in this era, and that's a great thing to see, it's forever changing and there's always something else around the corner.
Do you feel like there has been kind of an active change from kind of a focus on, entertainment to purely kind of winning, or do you think that those two are kind of inherently wrapped up in this kind of next 10 games? And
no, look, I think ultimately you always pivot from different things. Sometimes you need an environment, or sometimes you need players that they might need a tougher environment. They might need someone who's sort of on them a little bit. Sometimes you need someone who's going to try and take pressure off. It's never a binary thing, either one or the other. And we just sort of try and focus on getting our players to play as well as we possibly can. And that's what I think Brendan's the best coach I've ever seen, because that's what he does. And he's different with every single player. Some people he's hard on, some people he's not. If you don't toe the line, I've seen him and Ben Stokes properly sort of like read the riot act at some players. And I've seen them do the opposite with others. It's like changes all the time. So we don't really focus on, I know sometimes the players have, and sometimes they sort of take the tactics and the way that they're being managed as, well, this is just the way it is. And it's like, well, no, so they don't always give the best reflection of what that environment's about. But ultimately, things like winning, that's the outcome. That's everything we're trying to do. What we've got to focus on is how you get them to that stage, how you get players to play their very best.
Do you have regrets about the way some of the noises that have come out of a camp over the last couple of years? And have you tried to educate players on what to say, or is that impossible because they're a young cricketer going to run their mouths?
And look, I think that I don't sort of mind. People can have their opinions on whether we're any good, whether what we're doing is right. I don't like it when things come out like they don't train, they're lazy, arrogant, all of that stuff, because I don't see any of that at all. And I think, as you guys know, it may well end up even frustrating you guys, is that what I sort of try to educate them on is saying, you live in a soundbite world now. Like when I was working for Sky and we do an interview, I'd sort of, with the producer, say, that's a good grab, get that, because that will spark some interest. And we live in a world now where, even this podcast, you'll take a couple of lines that you think are the one that will generate the most interest and the most, with the controversy and all that. And I'm trying not to say anything controversial. And and sometimes they're not savvy enough to do that. I did a couple of Indian journalists, an interview with them yesterday, and there's a big thing about is this bigger than the Ashes? And I sort of I know where you're going with this, and you try not to give people that headline. Albeit then I sometimes think I used to play cricket against Eddie Hearn, and I sat with him in the Caribbean. He came to one of the games, and the way he would do the opposite, he would ham everything up. He'd go into, make some really controversial statements to drag up the interest. So I don't know what's right.
When did you play cricket with Eddie Hearn? What's
Kent under 11s versus Essex under 11s.
What did he do?
I can't remember. He was a batter. There was Stephen Peters. There was a load of us. Essex, they were always flash, weren't they? They were the first ones to have proper helmets and all of that. And we're like, oh my God, how good are these kids? Stephen Peters was and then O.A. Shah, if you remember him, he was he's the best player in the world at that stage, at under 14s or something.
Do you have to be careful not to get too wound up by these things, by the way that stuff is reflected in the press, the way that we pick up on individual lines, like you say, the sound bites make headlines? It sounds like the players, there's a danger of putting too much pressure on them. They're frightened of saying anything.
No, I actually go the other way a little bit, where I want them to say more. I actually think podcasts are generally, and longer form stuff is much better than what you take out of a 20-minute press conference.
Yeah.
When you get to know, I actually want people to get to know what Harry Brook's like, because I've played with people who are proper, I can swear, with some pretty average people at times who are so pleased with themselves. I'm not going to say who they are.
It's a headline if you do.
I know, exactly. And I don't see that in this team. I actually see, sometimes I wouldn't mind if they're a little bit more, had a little bit more arrogance at times. I don't see that with this team at all. So it does, the stuff in the media doesn't really wind me up. I just always want to sort of correct things that aren't true. That's the difference on that. You can have opinion, that's fine, but people can't say things that are factually incorrect. And also, it's all part of the job, is that one of the hardest things about playing international cricket, or certainly Test cricket, more so than anything else for England, is the scrutiny that comes on you, and that's part of the gig, right? And that's fine. So I'm always, and Brendan's the same, and Ben, you're always trying to sort of limit that noise on people. I mean, we all know it generally ends up between who do we think shouldn't be playing and who should be in, and that when the sort of gun rolls round to you, when you've had a few bad games, that becomes harder to deal with. So we're always trying really to quieten that noise as much as you can, which you actually can't a lot of the time, but you're trying not to add to it. So you feel like these players can go out and perform to their best, because there's not a moment of the day that they're not thinking about cricket. That's what, that's the thing with the golf and stuff like that, like, didn't tell them to stop playing golf, just stop giving easy headlines about it and talking about it as I have here. But it's more like...
And then you did an interview on the golf course.
Yeah, but that was
You look like you're ready
day.
to go and play golf now.
right.
Well, that's all I wear, mate.
Charity golfers.
Just in case. Yeah, I was playing the Bob Willis prostate cancer day, and they said to me, would you do an interview with Sky News? And I thought, I've just sort of said to them, don't. And here I am on the 10th tee. It's like, anyway. But there's more important things than that. But it's more like, I think it's so important for these lads to have something else outside of the cricket, because even I, there's not a moment I go through where I'm not thinking about the selection side of it, this, all these different parts of the job. And it's like you get a moment, whether it's cinema, whether it's whatever it is you do, where you can just switch off and have a bit of peace of mind. And I think that's so important. That's all everything we do is so that these players can perform to their best, and make this the best time of their lives. And you only do that when you're playing well. You can do whatever you want, but if you're not scoring runs, it's, it's not an enjoyable place to be. So you're trying to just create things that allow them and make it easier to sort of just focus on the cricket and perform when they need to.
What are you expecting from India this week, this series? Because they're quite a different looking side to one that English fans have probably become used to. No Kohli, no Rohit Sharma, just a few changes there. What are you expecting from them?
I've watched sort of in awe actually in India over the last few years and see the talent that they have coming through. It's like, I actually think that India, whether it's now, hopefully not, will go from strength to strength. Like when these great players who have done so much for the game go, as they have done, that's not the end of India. They'll very quickly, they'll flip and some player will come in. I mean, when we were out there last time, it was Jaiswal. I love watching him bat, such a good player. So exciting. Then you watch some of the IPL, the young kid who's 14 coming in. Bumrah, there's going to be so many great battles, and we've got now some of the best batsmen in the world as well. And it's going to watch those guys. And that's the point I said earlier. We don't know who the next big four will be. We'll all have a guess of it, with the batting and stuff like that. And that's why I actually think now, people talk forever about the demise of Test cricket. To me, it's all about, as long as you've got talent coming through, as long as you're producing talent, then you've got to be brave enough to pick it and not say, oh, by the way, you're not playing until you've played 100 red ball games in domestic cricket. No. Get the most talented players in, create an environment where you feel they can succeed. And then I think Test cricket's in great health. And India have got so many players like that.
What linked to that, why have Ben Stokes and Brendan McCullum been so good at getting new players into the environment and doing well quickly? There's a long list of players who've taken a fiver or scored runs on their debut in this team. Why have they found it easy to come in?
I don't think it's one thing. I think it's every single thing they do. Like Colt, everyone's always like, you work for the ECB, you do lots of education courses, all of this stuff about, culture. How do you get the environment right? How do you get culture right? All those things, they're the things that happen when nobody's watching. They're the things you live by every second of the day. So all the things I'm talking about, how they try and quieten the noise, it could be the odd word that Brendan has, the way that Ben Stokes looks at you, the way it's every single thing. That gets them to perform the way they do, because that's the real skill, right? People talk about selection, like we're very clear on how we want to select teams and the players we want, to be honest. But the real skill, and a lot gets made of that. They've selected well there. No, what they've done really well is that Ben and Brendan have created an environment where they can succeed and thrive. You look at the white ball, I thought Harry Brook did it well. Will Jacks goes in at number 7, plays really well, became a really important part for us. There's another world in where that's a disaster. It's the same selection, but what it is the environment that Harry Brook was able to create, the clarity, the conviction, the confidence that they give people. And it's hard, it's hard to say. It's like, it's just the way that they manage each individual is what does it really.
Is that more important? That's more important than the tactical changes, isn't it? The bowling changes, most captains will get that. right. Generally, it's that ability to be able to click with a team and click with players that's the most important aspect of captaincy. And will Ben be able to do that when the scrutiny of an Ashes tour in Australia is right on him? 'Cause he's not actually had that yet, has he?
No, well, not in Australia, no, but he's had it. Obviously, he's had lots of scrutiny throughout his career and his life, and that's the thing. They're the moments actually. You asked the question about how do they do it. It's when you fail. It's how you react when it doesn't go well. So I thought one of the great pieces of management or managing people was during that Ashes series at home, which might give you a little bit of an insight into how they work. I remember that first Test match at Edgbaston. Bloody good game of cricket that. And I'm sort of sitting there in the back, hidden away. The first couple of days we were with Fred, and then just in an office watching it on telly, which was after like a delay all the time. So the first ball's that Crawley hit, you're a bit like, oh my God, like what's happened there? Is that a wicket? And you sort of got to know what was happening by
You'd hear the cheer.
Yeah. And there was like pick and mix everywhere. So we just eating sweets. But anyway, I remember sort of thinking we're going to win. Oh my God, we've lost. And I remember thinking then, there's always these moments. I thought, I'm going to go in the dressing room, and the last thing they need is to see me down, because we got back-to-back Test matches. This is not a time now where you've got to be like, the world's coming to an end. Oh God, everyone's gutted, genuinely gutted. But this is where your leaders need to make sure they're shown. And I went in there, and Ben Stokes and Brennan were focusing on. Sounds pathetic now I'm saying it, like the positives, but it's in their whole body language and everything. Clearly they were hurting, but they knew that this is when you need to pick people up, and they did that well, and that's how they then came back from 2-0, and that's what they're going to have to keep on doing. When that scrutiny comes, when things don't go well, that's where you're tested as a leader, and that's where they do it. That's where you keep with the conviction, keep with the clarity of what you're trying to do. Keep sticking to your style and identity, so people don't start doubting what that is. So people aren't, well, what do they want me to do here? No, you can go out there and you can have conviction in what you're doing, because this is what we're about. And that's the sort of key to it. So when that does come in Australia, or in this series versus India, they're the moments you're tested. And so far, both Brendan and Ben have done it brilliantly. That's the magic of them, really. You're always looking around. I know I'm waffling now. You're always looking around. It's when someone plays the bad shot and gets out, is how do you react to that? I've seen coaches when they sit around and say, right, in one-day cricket, they're like, right, let's go out there, play without fear, and let's go. I want you to go out there, be really brave, take the positive option. If in doubt, take the positive option. Bloke goes out, plays a big shot, comes in. What the hell were you doing there? And you're like, the whole dressing room just goes.
Yeah.
And they're the moments. Like you always, it's like all of us. Any bosses you've got, any people in charge, you don't really remember what they've told you, but you always remember how they make you feel, whether they made you feel like you're rubbish, or that you weren't or actually that you could conquer the world, really, and you could take risk. And that's the key to it.
On the flip side of the kind of Stokes' handling of young players, has there been any frustration with how someone like a Shoaib Bashir or a Rehan Ahmed have kind of been handled by their counties? Obviously, Bashir's had to go out on several loans, which probably hasn't been ideal. Rehan Ahmed doesn't seem to get much opportunity to bowl at the top order, although obviously getting a chance to bat higher up the order is something new this summer. Is that something that's kind of been a frustration, or something you've had much input into? Or
No.
What you need, before you answer this question, what you need to know is that Jake is the man who commissions a lot of our cricket, and he's a Rehan Ahmed super.
Oh, are you?
So, yeah. So he's legend.
I think his move up the order is an exciting development for English cricket.
And he had the right 900 words in it. So yeah, that's.
You think that's? I must answer it. I think it's a very sorry. No, I made a sort of pact to myself, really, as much as anything, that I could get embroiled in like county politics. They got like this domestic review, and I know I ended up, in the high performance review we did before. It's a hard thing to change, right? Like, it's just a different style of cricket at the moment, because they play so much cricket at the start of the year. So what spinner really is going to do a huge amount? If you're selecting a team, when you've got 7 championship games right at the start of the year, and all right, we haven't had much rain, but they're slow pitches at that time of year because, you know, they haven't had a chance to get hard and fast, which is what a bowler like Bashir wants. You know, and then they've got Jack Leach there. So it's not for me to tell them who, you know, now it's very clear. Last year it wasn't. You know, we knew which way we were going to go probably. But they've got, you know, they're not, you know, if you're a director of cricket or you're a county head coach, you're not, you know, your job isn't decided by how England are doing. You know, like your job is on whether you're winning championships. You've seen with Lancashire at the moment, you know, Dale Benkenstein's gone. Nothing to do with us there. That's for how Lancashire do. So I don't think it's fair for me to be telling counties, and it's not, you know, I haven't got the jurisdiction to do it really. You know, the same with Jacob Bethel. You know, everyone was saying like, you know, how is Jacob Bethel playing for England 6-8 months ago? Now everyone thinks he should play every game, you know, like, but the point is a bit more like, well, yeah, we're almost a bit like, well, yeah, we would have been having him batting 3 for Warwickshire for years, but that's not our place to do that. That's for Warwickshire to decide on that, and the director of cricket and the head coach there. So my long-winded answer to your question is like, it doesn't frustrate me. I know, you know, I've seen all of county cricket. You know, I feel like I've seen the really, you know, the what I would consider a brilliant era of it, which did, if you're talking purely on standard, that was the early 2000s, which actually had Kolpat players, 2 overseas, all of that. The pitches were as good as I think they've ever been really in English cricket. And then no surprise, that 2005 bowling attack comes out of that, and that era that goes with Strauss to number 1 in the world. So I sort of feel like I've seen every part of county cricket and understand how it works really. And I understand the problems and you know, it's a harder job than mine in a lot of ways. You know, like I've got the choice of 300-400 cricketers to pick from. You know, you're a county like Kent, Adam Hollier, who I think is doing a brilliant job. You know, you've got players and you go, right, you know, I've got to get the most out of every single one. You learn it pretty tough there. So I think it's just to let them get on with it as best they can.
You mentioned Jacob Bethel. How do you solve that problem this week? How do you get him in the Test side?
I don't see it as a problem, really. I see it as something that you've got so many players, or you've now got so many options, but viable options as well. You know, and the problem with podcasts is, I don't know when this has come out, you know, we might get to the point where you find out who is going to be in that spot. And it's not for me on this podcast to sort of give you an exclusive as much as you like.
That's why we've got you here.
I was waiting for you. Like, as soon as I mentioned Bethel, I could see Will's face. Think, right, you know, I'm a journalist, but now I'm going to become like a podcaster. Like, bang, in we come. But yeah, you know, you win either way. I think really, you've got 2 brilliant players that can do a role, and you know, Ollie Pope's been fantastic in that tough spot. You know, he played brilliantly in New Zealand. I thought that was a brilliant series win out there. But all right, he was in a different role, but. You know, we've got 2 brilliant options in those spots.
Do you think, obviously, by Bethel not coming back for the Zimbabwe game and being at the IPL, it's kind of created this like situation? Do you think there was any mistake in him not being brought back to play in that game?
No, I don't think so. You know, the politics of it were, you know, this is sort of done way in advance. You know, like and I made this sort of clear to the players that. You know, after last year when we pulled people back, this year, if you went into the IPL, you had to commit to that. You know, and you know, we made a deal with India really to say that no, the players that we put up for it, this is before Christmas, we would actually, you know, knowing that Zimbabwe test was there, you know, was there, you know, and so I don't regret that. We sort of said to them, so no, we'll commit our players to that. That's fine. And if they're going to pull out of it, they'll have to pull themselves out of it. And I'm not for sort of reneging on those promises, really. You know, there's obviously bigger things at play with India and stuff like that. And I don't regret it. I think, you know, I don't think the year is defined for Ollie Pope, or the careers for Ollie Pope and Jacob Bethel are defined by what happens this week. You know, or whether he came back to play the Zimbabwe test. He may not have played that test match, and then you would have been like, you know, so I think that watching his development has been extraordinary. And him going out there and playing in the IPL, I think, was brilliant for him, not just so he could talk to Virat Kohli and see how he goes, but just being there on that stage, seeing how great players go about it. I think we'll get the return on that in the future.
Is that the toughest decision you've faced? Selectors, the number 3
No.
this week.
No, I don't. There's much tougher decisions, I think, in my role, I suppose, than that. The whole contract system, all of that type of stuff. There's much bigger things at play, and I think it's not in terms of a tough decision is when you've got no options and you've got to just then sort of like try and find something from nowhere. That's when I'm sort of scratching my head. This one, which really good player are we going to pick? It's, good position to be in.
Hi, Stuart Broad here. I really hope you're enjoying the Telegraph's Cricket Podcast, proudly sponsored by Laithwaite's Wine. Laithwaite's has an incredible range of wines, from big, bold reds to crisp, refreshing whites and everything in between. Perfect for any occasion, delivered straight to your door. And now my very own range, Beyond the Wicket, is available at Laithwaite's too. It's 6 great wines, 2 whites, 2 reds, a rosé and an English sparkling. Each inspired by my memories touring the world playing this incredible sport. Laithwaite stop at nothing to find the best wines from around the world. So, get ready for a great delivery, on and off the pitch. Visit laithwaites.co.uk and raise a glass to great cricket and great wine.
When you spoke about getting players in as early as possible, you've done that a lot with the Lions. I think Eddie Jack hadn't played a first-class game when he was called up to play a very strong India A side. Now he's kind of hanging out with Test squad this week. He tells a bit about him, but also that kind of selection approach to the Lions and how you're trying to blend that.
Well, I think the Lions is so important. I think our whole pathway is important, again, because you're giving experiences for international cricket. As I say, like county cricket is played a lot on, green surfaces that suit one style of cricketer, or one style of bowler in particular. So someone like Eddie Jack, I can completely understand why he hasn't played any first-class cricket. But then when we see him play, when you then put him into an attack of 3 other guys that might be able to bowl 83, 84 mile an hour plus, then all of a sudden it starts to look more like what, the best attacks in the world are. And you just think, these lads now, I just think you've got one job, is pick the most talented players you can and give them experiences, and that's what we try and do with the Lions. That's why Andrew Flintoff and Ed Barney, and you have complementary skills in that. So Andrew Flintoff with the performance director Ed Barney is a brilliant combination. Fred's got that real inspiration. He's been there, he's done it. He understands what it's. He's more like Brendan McCullum, where he understands what you're going through. So when you speak to Fred about players, you get a rundown really on not just them as the player, but what they're really like, what they're going through, what they think, which is really important. And he makes people feel, like they can conquer the world really. And he does it in a subtle way. You can't just tell people you're great and that's it. Obviously helps if you're Andrew Flintoff. But, then when you look at it from the batting point of view as well, you start to see, how can you go against quicker bowling? Against an international attack, which you might not see. I think there was a game, Somerset-Essex, where James Rew got a brilliant 100, as did Jordan Cox, 2 people in the shake-up. But, the average speed in that was about 75 miles per hour. And in international cricket, it's above that by quite some difference. So it gives us an opportunity to make judgments on it. There's a guy who didn't play because he played too much for county cricket, which was Tom Laws, who is in that Wokes mould. So it's like we wanted him to play that, and it didn't quite work out because you then run the risk of him playing too much and getting injured. But these guys will start coming through, and it's like, we can now start picking, obviously it will change, but you could start thinking about what your test attack might be in 5 or 6 years' time, which is really important. So we've got the short term now to be where your feet are and all of that stuff. But then it's like part of my job, and Ed Barney and Luke Wright, David Court, is to make sure that it doesn't just finish when we all stop. Like you want these players to come through. That's why Lions is so important.
You mentioned there that Flintoff as a coach is quite similar to Brendan in terms of how he kind of puts his arm around players. Would he be a kind of natural successor perhaps down the line some point in terms of that kind of mould of character?
Yeah, I think he'd be an excellent head coach of England. Andrew Flintoff, there you go. There's your soundbite that you can have. But no, I think he's brilliant for that. And just let me qualify one thing on there, because it gets said this sort of arm round your shoulder sort of gets led to, how you feeling, mate? You're all right, and all this. That's not just what it is. There's the other times as well. So you're not fit enough. You need to do, whatever it is where you're being, it's tough love as much as anything else. It's no different from raising your kids at times. Like if you just tell your kids they're great all the time and give them everything they want, you've got some pretty average kids growing up, I reckon. And it's no different as players, like the last thing you want is entitled cricketers who think that everyone should be doing them a favour. It's like, no. You want to create players that, everyone wants to follow, really, because they're bloody good players who go out there, win games of cricket, and they're a great role model for what, you want people to look up to.
Could you tell us a bit about Rocky Flintoff? Because I don't think he's been in quite a few squads. He scored 100 for Lions in winter. Hasn't played that much for Lancs. Clearly very young. His dad's the head coach for Lions. He's been in a few of those squads, but maybe people don't know much about him. What's he like as a cricketer and as a character? And what's made you guys think that he deserves to be in the England Lions, which is like a second string team in many ways? It's quite a call up, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's not necessarily just the out and out second team that we've had throughout the winter. Like there's a part of it where you've got someone like that Tom Haynes, who looks like he's a seasoned professional cricketer, who looks a very good player. What I love about him is I remember watching him 3 or 4 years ago, and he was like a natural left-hander, gave himself a bit of room, and flayed it through the offside and scored a lot of runs. And I look at him 3 or 4 years later, and he's still like a left-hander, gives himself a bit of room, flays it through the offside, scores a lot of runs. And what he does is, there's so many people who tinker in the game, and he doesn't. And Rocky is one of those players that we're looking at long-term, and there's a lot of those guys as well that are coming through. We saw Tom Rue get 100 against Zimbabwe, like seriously exciting, 17, 18-year-olds. And you're trying to expose them to stuff, and you're trying to like make them think like this is where there's nothing wrong with putting aspiration into players and making them feel like England's close. It just pushes them on. So Rocky Flintoff is, he's an excellent batsman, but also we haven't seen a lot of him bowling because he's been injured. He's in that point as a young man where you get injured a lot. And he'll come out the other side. But you're talking in years to come,
Does he bowl like his dad?
Well, I haven't seen a lot of him bowl, but he's got the potential. Yeah, he's a seriously exciting prospect, and it's irrelevant really of his name. He's played in the Lions and scored 100, and you just want to pick really talented players. And then it's your job. I hate coaches that when they sort of get really talented players, oh yeah, but they're a bit difficult. No, that's why no one ever fell out with the worst player. You never hear of those stories. It's always the harder players, and your job is to get the most out of them. And Rocky Flintoff's a serious talent, as a lot of those young players are. It's so exciting to see him, just get them in there and see them play.
We see you giving these guys more sort of exposure around the England team. You've got, like you say, you've got Eddie Jack there this week.
Yeah, I think Eddie Jack actually might be going back to play in the championship game,
right?
Because that was the plan, was to have him around and stuff. But I think he might be playing the T20 in the next couple of days. So he sort of has got back into that shake-up. And look, I think he looks a seriously exciting talent, Eddie Jack. But yeah, that's what you want to try and do, really. You want your system. If you look at it, there's different ways to get into the England setup. People think there's only one way. It's not true. You look at someone like Ben Duckett, who came in through county cricket. You look at someone like Sam Cook, who came in through county cricket. Then we have the lads that get fast-tracked through the Lions system and stuff like that. So
Shoaib Bashir comes in through WhatsApp.
Shoaib Bashir comes in through WhatsApp, yeah, and just like, I don't know, but that's it. You end up, there's lots of different ways. And then people sort of say, like, well, you're not picking from the county. I said, where do you think these guys are coming from? They're not coming from the Dog and Duck, we literally, they are being produced by the counties. When people are annoyed at Jacob Bethel and saying like, wow, where do you think he's going? Right, maybe he's come from Barbados. But it's like that they've come through the pathway in county cricket. That's doing a great job, like they're all coming. And we've, there's people that we've seen for years, and even before I started, they were talking, David Court, Mo Bobat were talking about, it was Rue and Bethel, if you remember that, back then, for the under-9, and you just watch this Jacob Bethel, as you do with James Rue, but Bethel, you're like, it's like Quinton de Kock, like what a player he's going to be. So there's lots of different avenues for us.
Looking back to the the India series this week, and we talked a bit about who's not here for India with the sort of great players who retired, but the one man who is going to be is Jasprit Bumrah. You can borrow that bat over there if you like. I mean, how would you face Bumrah? What would you?
Not
do?
very well. I think, I don't know. You sort of got to. There's a few traits that they reckon that are really important to be a great bowler, and like Bumrah's got them all, and it's like pace, skill, release point, all of this stuff. I know he's not the tallest bowler, and the one that's like really is like awkwardness. So he looks like, I wouldn't know when to set, I was such a head case. That's why I'm sort of like trying to keep it simple. I think we overcomplicate the game, certainly in England for batting, and it's like, when would I trigger against him? He comes in off that almost walking run up and then the big lean back and then there's the angle in. So you would have to sort of play for that, I think, but then he can do it the other way. So I don't know. I wouldn't play him very well, albeit I was all right against the quicker bowlers. It was like the 75-mile-an-hour dobber. Dave Masters, Mascarenhas, Kevin Dean. There's a whole list. Everyone thinks I'm out to get them now for what they did to me on my career. With how these guys play them is going to be something else. I mean, you're going to have to, at times you're going to have to counter punch. At times you're going to have to be watchful. Again, it's brilliant. You don't feel like there's moments where you're lucky enough in these jobs we do to watch great players. Like I felt that with Joe Root, where you're just like, it's pretty lucky actually and you forget with Joe Root because he's so nice and such a humble bloke that this is the best player I've ever seen bat for England. And the same with Bumrah. He'll end up being one of the great bowlers of any era, I think, when you end it, and that's when he ends his career. And that's what a great contest is: watching him versus Root, Brooke, Crawley. Whoever bats number 3, it is going to be incredible. Jamie Smith, all of his.
He's batting 3, is he?
No. Yeah, it could be. He's done all right opening, hasn't he? Yeah. We've got loads of people who can bat 3.
Yeah.
And before you go, I did an interview earlier this summer actually with Darren Lehman, and he came out with some words about Bazball and said it would never work in Australia and it's great fun to watch, but actually England never win the games of cricket. That was the first sort of shot in the Ashes phony war. I mean, you've had a bit of time to reflect on that. Was that unfair criticism? I think
but do you know what? Like, it's a good job you've got me now for this, because if you'd have asked me at the time, I might give you a different answer. But I love watching Darren Lehman bat. He was one of my favourite. I remember he used to nick the strike better than anyone in the game when he played for Yorkshire. You'd stand at gully and he'd turn round a square leg and say, 2 balls to go, and they go, yeah, and he'd just run one down the third man. He played as if the bat was an extension of his arm. Fantastic player. And I hope they do well, Northants. Like I would have said like where they are in the championship, but actually Kent are bottom. Don't even have that one on here at the moment. But we'll see. It's going to be a fascinating year.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for coming in, Rob.
No worries.
Okay, so what did you make of that from Rob Key, Nick?
Very interesting on the bowlers, wasn't he? Particularly keeping the guys on the park, which, as Will mentioned about the fact that Stark, Hazelwood and Cummins are always there, always fit, always playing the big games in all formats as well, not just in Test cricket. And that's something that England really need to sort of learn from and hope that they can emulate, because they're not winning in Australia if the bowlers are not fit. And it's encouraging that Archer's tracking, or trucking as Luke Wright would say, and that he said that Wood could play a Test match before the end of the summer, which I'd kind of written him off for this summer. So that again was encouraging. But can these guys are they robust enough to play 5 Test matches this summer? 5 Test matches against Australia, because England just don't have that depth. I think that got sort of exposed a little bit against Zimbabwe. The guys who came in didn't look as strong as the guys that they were replacing, and we've seen with South Africa with Rabada, we're going to see it with India with Bumrah, and Australia obviously with Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins, that they've got bowlers who can win Test matches on their own, and England at the moment don't feel they've got that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if Archer, Wood, and Carter all fit simultaneously, they'll be absolutely overjoyed. It's just whether or not that's ever going to happen is the big question. It feels like.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting how he spoke about not trying to change county cricket, and implicit in that, I think, is kind of working slightly in spite of it and not alongside of it. He was involved in that review in 2022, which ended pretty disastrously, didn't it? And there's another one going on at the moment, but I'm pretty sure he's just not. England aren't involved in that at all. That's completely county led, and almost it's left to the CEOs and the chairs of the county to sort that out. And it's the same with selection. They're saying that if they see a player, they don't care whether he's being picked by their county, they're going to go and get him involved in the setup in some way or another. So I thought that was, rather than trying to, I think you can probably, in that role, it's so broad, you can get quite distracted and try to fix everything in the game. But it's probably not worth it. You're probably better trying to kind of control what you can control, which I sense is what he's trying to do.
And that take on selection has changed quite quickly, hasn't it? I mean, it wasn't like that probably in their first year, but it certainly accelerated last year. And you can't imagine 4 or 5 years ago England managing director saying that they would pick based on their own instincts rather than whether guys play Test cricket or not. I mean, you could imagine Eddie Jack playing a Test match.
I think
this
it's
summer.
plausible this summer.
I mean, you could.
Yeah.
You wouldn't keel over.
Well, they
if
picked
that
Josh
happened.
Holt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Rehan Ahmed was probably the first one, but where they just completely plucked him from nowhere and kind of used that get him around the boys approach, and then selected him for the third test.
He said, I was at the book launch last night, and I was talking to one of the Aussie journos that was there, and he was saying that there is this kind of astonishment in Australia that England are thinking of picking a bloke at number 3 in Jacob Bethel, who's never scored a first class or professional 100. They think that's a representation of the Poms know absolutely nothing, that they don't know what they're doing, this lot, rather than it being a kind of bold, innovative thing, that they've seen something in a player who's obviously got a lot of talent and he's going to go a long way in the game. So because we're so close to it, we perhaps don't always recognise or understand that this is actually quite a unique way of doing things. And it does make them an interesting team to certainly cover for us, but also to watch as an England fan. But it must be exasperating if you're a county supporter as well and you see players
or a county player.
Or a county player, yeah.
That being said, though, the debutant this summer was Sam Cook, who was somewhat of a kind of county clamour selection almost, and whether or not that was a reward, a long overdue reward, rather than the kind of the best thing for England going forward. But now he's played, and that kind of almost everyone's had a look at him, and Wokes will probably come back in for him now, you'd have thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cook also was picked partly on his performance with the Lions over the last winter, and I think if he hadn't have been on that Lions tour, and if he hadn't have done well on that Lions tour, I don't think he would have played that Test match. I think that is still a very crucial staging post in the players' careers, how they play on the Lions, what Andrew Flintoff thinks. I mean, I know that it was interesting. I know Rob had said it before that he could be the next England coach. And I think that his influence behind the scenes is big on who gets selected in this team. I mean, he is the eyes and ears behind the scenes on the players coming through, and feeds that into McCullum and to Stokes. So his view on Cook would have actually gone quite a long way into him playing that Test match against Zimbabwe. And quite a few of us were guilty of thinking this guy will only be a one-cap wonder, and could still happen, obviously. But he's in the squad this week. Wokes is not bowled a lot this year. There's not a lot of gap between test matches now, because England play home test series as if they're like a tournament now. They're over in 6 weeks. Wokes isn't going to play all those games, so you never know. He could actually play another match.
Okay, well, let's round things off now by answering some of your questions. Okay, well, the first question came in from Tom. Thank you, Tom. Depending on the results versus India and Australia, are we potentially in the final 12 months of Ben Stokes' career? Might he decide to walk away after the Ashes?
Yes, I think's the answer to that. I don't know. I'm not saying Ben Stokes will be gone in 12 months. What I'm saying is we are potentially entering the last year of his career. We still don't know how fit he is. He hasn't put in a significant shift with the ball yet. He hasn't played in much cricket, really, only that Zimbabwe Test match in 6 months. I always worry whenever anyone says to me, do you know what, Stokes is looking magnificent, and because that's when he always gets injured, and he does look magnificent at the moment. I was at Durham last week doing a feature up there, and he was in the nets. He was steaming in, and they were saying he's been in every day, So we don't know how his body's going to hold up. He hasn't scored a run for 2 years, really, with the bat.
Yeah, he hasn't made 100 for 2
Hasn't made 100 for 2 years. So we could be. I hope we're not, obviously, because he's an inspirational captain and one of the greatest cricketers England have ever produced. And equally, this could be the making of him. This break he's had and reset. It could be just what. So yes, it could be, but it also at the same time, he could be even stronger this time next year.
Well, from what we've heard of him so far, I don't think he'll be holding on for the 2027 World Test Championship final. So
He might be, but I was thinking as we were talking to Key there that actually the whole regime could be gone in a year's time. We've Stokes, McCullum, Key have been the kind of axis, and it's been 3 years now. They've been in the job. English cricket still works in those kind of away Ashes cycles, and generally the last few away Ashes have made a real mess of regimes, and there's been change afterwards. Generally, not exclusively, but generally. So it could change. Stokes turned 34 this month, so he's starting to get on in cricketing terms. I think he's contracted with England till 2027 now. I think so is McCullum. That doesn't mean anything, but players retire in strange ways now. They don't necessarily walk away mid-contract because the contracts are quite good, quite lucrative. So while I think it's possible, I would still expect Stokes to be playing Test cricket for England this time next year. Partly because in the pipeline, I don't, as much as England are trying to sort out various issues in their team, top order batting, spin bowling, all those kind of things, I don't see the next great seam bowling all-rounder coming through. So yeah, I expect Stokes to still be around next year, but who knows?
Okay, well, the next one is from Freddie. Why did England name their team 2 days early?
I think it's clarity for the players. I don't know. I've never understood why teams play this cloak and dagger game in cricket and say, we're not naming it until the toss, because the squads are so small compared to what they are.
14-man squad.
They're 14. It's not like football or rugby where you've got 30 players to choose from, and there may be a tactical reason why you want to hold somebody back. I mean, generally, most teams are pretty settled in Test cricket, and the big announcement you're waiting for at the toss is the third seamer. That seems a bit. And actually, naming the team in cricket doesn't mean anything until you actually hand over the team sheet anyway at the toss. So you can change it if there's if there is an injury. So yeah, I think they just do it as because they want to seem as a team that knows which direction they're taking, and clarity for the players.
There are also probably quite a few examples of teams getting tripped up at the toss by the conditions on the morning of and making a decision which they come to regret very shortly afterwards. Maybe there's an element of that as well.
I think the third thing is leaks. I think they're trying to get ahead of leaks.
Trying to make your job harder.
Yeah, exactly. Trying to make our job harder.
They are slightly obsessed by that, this regime, which has crept up slowly.
It's generally sort of, at the moment, sort of go behind the curtain a little bit, is they tell the players and then pretty quickly afterwards they stick something in a media WhatsApp group under embargo for half an hour or so and then tell the world. But I think that is part of it, that they want to have control the announcement rather than the media doing so.
We've had situations where players have found out in the media where they've, whether they're playing or not. We had it on a recent Ashes tour. Won't go into too much detail about who and what, but a player got very upset that he discovered that he wasn't going to play in the next Test match, and the coach launched a mole hunt, and actually the bloke who told everybody was the coach. So
successful hunt in the end, I guess.
Yeah.
Got there in the end.
Okay, we've got one from Harry here. If you had to predict who the next uncapped player will be to play for England in Test cricket, who would you guess? Go on, Will. You've got your ear to the ground.
Sonny Baker would be my pick. He wasn't one of the names mentioned by Rob Keever. He mentioned Tom Haines, Eddie Jack, Rocky Flintoff. We kind of pushed him that way, didn't we? But a few others as well. But Sonny Baker, I think, was quite close at the start of this summer, and I think that specific. He hasn't played much first-class cricket either, and he's also at Hampshire where Eddie Jack is, but that proper pace that he's got, I think they think could work at Test level. He's a shorter fast bowler, kind of a bit like Mark Wood, but has the potential to be properly quick. So I would go with him. It's just because he sounds a bit different, a bit unique.
Nick?
I think it's a great question. I really do, because you just never know with England.
Which position is going to open up?
Well, exactly.
Jamie Smith could get injured next week, and Jordan Cox.
Exactly. I would say probably it's between. You're looking at Cox and Root, who were in the squads recently, but I don't think they're going to pick a new batsman against India or Australia. They're not going to throw in a debutant in these unless they really have to because they've had a string of injuries. So you are probably looking at a bowler, probably then looking at a fast bowler as well, aren't you? So, that's quite a good shout.
Eddie Jack, I think, would be the other one there.
But I'd say he hasn't played first class. He hasn't played a championship match for Hampshire. I don't.
No, he hasn't.
No,
He's
so
played 2 first class games, both for Lions.
The fact that we can read a bit too much into the fact that he's knocking around the England team this week.
And it doesn't sound like he is actually going to be because he's going to play for Hampshire. So
yes, but he's still he was probably he's prepared and actually had a little taste of being around the team, which can only be good for him. But a lot of people are going to have to Google Eddie Jack.
Yeah, his middle name's Vaughan, and he was born on September the 9th, 2005. So I suspect, haven't had this clarified yet, but I suspect he's named after. His middle name is named after Michael Vaughan.
Well, I hope he does play because that's a great fact.
Yeah.
Okay, so one last one here from Desi, who's asked, who should India pick, Jadeja or Kuldeep for the right choice in England?
I think to start off, I think Jadeja gets into their best batting lineup.
Yeah,
their best top. I think in the best top 6. Not even top 7 or 8. I think he gets into that. So I suspect he'll play. But I'd actually pick them both. I think Kuldeep was so good on that England tour of India last year. He's got proper mystery. There would be days where England would take a chunk out of him. I remember he played on that 2018 tour and struggled a bit after doing really well in the one days. But I think he has that kind of wrist spin, especially left arm wrist spin against this England team. I think could cause some real havoc. I've also got a soft spot for him because we were both there, weren't we? We ran into him in a Italian restaurant in Dharamshala last year, and he was kind of
Good
wearing.
for you boys experiencing the culture.
Yeah, it was the 5th test.
It's a restaurant called Jimmy's, and he spent most of the time talking about Jimmy Anderson.
Yeah,
which
and he was very, very good company that evening, wasn't he? He was mainly interested in talking to Michael Afton, but we were involved in the conversation tangentially.
Yeah.
But he's a great lad, and he was out and about in Dharamshala on a night out, which most of his teammates weren't.
No, and I think I love watching him bowl, and I think he's a much better bowler than he was in 2018 as well. Yeah. And I think the pitch is going to probably be very flat this summer, fairly flat anyway. The weather looks good too. So, and England don't have a mystery spinner. They don't have a bowler like Bumrah, and India do. So pick them.
A big thank you to Rob Key for coming in for our first episode, and to you, Nick, and to you, Will. We'll be back after the first test match and throughout this series against India. But in the meantime, please head over to the Telegraph website for the best of all our cricket content from Nick, Will, Shield Tim, Michael Vaughan, Jeffrey Boycott. Until next week, goodbye.
Hi, Stuart Broad here. I hope you're enjoying a great summer. I'm here with Laithwaite's Wine, the proud sponsor of the Telegraph's Cricket Podcast. Check out my Beyond the Wicket range of wines at Laithwaite's, inspired by my memories travelling the world playing this incredible sport we love. Visit laithwaites.co.uk for more details.